The skies over Zaret 5 had always been calm, purple clouds swirling lazily. Above its golden fields, untouched by fire or fear, for generations the Zeri Empire ruled this quadrant of the galaxy. Without question, their dominance was total, their fleet unmatched. They had broken worlds, bent civilizations to their will, and ground resistance into dust with terrifying efficiency. And then Clear's throat, humanity arrived. At first the Zeri barely noticed. Strange little species from a barely charted system in a spiral-armed backwater. They sent envoys curious about this talkative, soft-skinned race that thrived on chaos and conflict. Humans smiled too much, talked too fast, and had far too many opinions, but they posed no threat. That's what the Zeri believed until the war began. A border dispute, a trade disagreement. No one remembered the exact trigger. What followed was swift and brutal. Zeri ships raised 2 human colonies in under a solar week. They left warning beacons among the ruins broadcasting. Submit or perish, they expected. Surrender, instead they got silence. For a full Earth year, no human response came. Patrols reported nothing. Probes detected no activity. It was as if Earth had gone dark. But then came that day. The day the Zeri cruiser Torvan patrolled the edge of Sector 17A, a dead zone where stars flickered dimly and space felt colder than it should. It was routine until they saw it emerge from a dust storm, swirling around a shattered moon, silent. At first like a ghost, a dark silhouette, impossibly massive. At first, the Zeri crew thought it was a trick of the sensors, a derelict station maybe, or a mining construct left to drift. Then the shadow moved. No Zeri ship had ever recorded a vessel of that scale. 4 times the size of their dreadnoughts. Its armor layered with black alloy so dense it bent light, the human insignia. A simple circle with a horizontal line slashed through it glowed faintly on its hull. But what sent true terror through the Torvan's bridge crew wasn't the size, it wasn't the arsenal of weapons bristling from its sides, or the formation of unmanned drones that floated silently around it. It was the silence, no hails, no warnings, no movement beyond its slow, deliberate drift, like a predator gliding through tall grass, knowing it doesn't need to chase to kill. Panic spread among the crew. Commander Vethel ordered immediate evasive maneuvers, but the Zari's pride had always been their downfall. Send a warning shot, he barked. We'll teach these primitives respect. A single pulse beam launched from the Torvan, streaking toward the behemoth. It never landed. Before it even neared the ship, a pale blue ripple spread out from its hull like water disturbed by pebble. The beam disintegrated midspace, dissolved into nothing. Then the human battleship moved. Lights flared along its surface, forming an eerie web of glowing red veins. A low hum, felt more than heard, reverberated through space, and from its belly a single word was broadcast in every known galactic frequency. Acknowledged. In less than 2 seconds, the Torvan ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris. One moment it was there, the next gone, atomized. A ripple of energy lingered in its place, expanding outward like the last breath of a dying god. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the message repeated. Acknowledged. Zari command centers went dark. Border stations flickered offline. Entire fleets lost contact within hours. What terrified the Empire more than the Destruction was the efficiency, no. Threats, no speeches, no rage, just cold, silent retaliation. Back on Zaret 5, Supreme Commander Varex watched the footage loop on his war screen. The battleship's silhouette hung, still above the shattered moon, drifting forward closer with every pass. He had seen every war, every rebellion, but this wasn't war, this was judgment, and for the first time in 3 centuries, the Zalari Empire fell. Fear. The halls of the Zeri High Command headquarters on Zaret 5 were built to impress and intimidate, polished blackstone floors, towering obsidian columns and ceilings etched with golden murals of conquest. Here decisions were made that had shaped entire sectors of the galaxy, but now even the air felt tense, as if the walls themselves sensed the dread crawling into the Empire's bones. Supreme Commander Varex stood motionless, claws gripped tightly behind his back as he watched the footage. Again, the same scene, the same silent destruction. The Torvan, a warship, formidable power, wiped from existence. In a blink, the humans had said nothing else, just acknowledged, not in anger, not as a threat, but as if they had simply marked a task complete, like checking a box, erasing a line. Status report, Varex growled. A young tactician, voice trembling, replied, "We've lost contact with 6 border stations, Supreme Commander. No alarms, no distress signals, just silence." How many of those stations had visual contact with the human ship? 3, sir. And are we certain it's only 1 ship? Long pause. No, sir, we can't be certain of anything. Varex turned slowly, his 4 cold yellow eyes burning into the tactician's skull. Then assume the worst until we confirm. Otherwise, we act as though an entire fleet is en route. Understood. But what unnerved Varex the most wasn't the possibility of more ships, it was how deliberate this single battleship had been. The humans hadn't rushed into a counterattack, they hadn't retaliated immediately after the initial aggression. They had waited, planned, built something the galaxy had never seen, and then they revealed it, not through broadcast or declaration, but by letting the Zeri witness it themselves. That wasn't war, that was art, a kind of cold, calculated performance designed to shatter morale at its very foundation. And it was working. He turned back to the war screen and issued a command. Mobilize the Shadow Corps. I want every available long-range interceptor launched toward the last known location of the human ship. If they want a war, we'll give them one. But even as he spoke, Varex could feel the lie in his words. The Empire didn't want war, it wanted mercy. Far across the void, the human vessel designation S judgment drifted slowly through the dark remains of Sector 17A. Inside, Commander Evelyn Ross stood on the bridge, her hands resting lightly on the railing. Her face was calm, eyes distant. Around her, crew members sat at various consoles, monitoring scans, adjusting signal feeds, and running simulations. No one spoke unless necessary. The silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Status, Evelyn asked softly. No enemy movements detected in our proximity. Estimated enemy reinforcements 14 Dreadnought-class vessels and 2 command carriers inbound from Zaret 5, ETA 13 hours, and local systems. 3 Zeri colonies abandoned. 1 attempted an evacuation, but their own command stopped it, claimed it would spread panic. The other 2. Initiated blackout protocols. Evelyn nodded. Fear is a better weapon than any rail gun, the officer beside her, Lieutenant Kale, shifted slightly. Ma'am, should we issue another warning? Some of these colonies may not be combatants. She looked at him, then returned her gaze to the stars. They watched as we burned as our colonies fell. Civilians, children, no one said a word. Then Kyle swallowed, understood. For over a year Earth had waited. They had studied the Zillary, decrypted their tech, and deciphered their battle tactics. Earth was a young civilization in the galactic community, but it had quality the others lacked: desperation. Humans evolved in a kill or die environment. They didn't dominate their planet by strength alone. They used fire, steel, and eventually machines. But it was their will, their sheer, relentless refusal to die quietly that had always defined them. The Zari expected submission. Humanity gave them silence, and now vengeance. Bring the primary weapon online, Evelyn said calmly. Set target coordinates for the Zillary command. Relay at Theta 9. Kyle's fingers danced across the console. Target locked. Weapon charged. Ready on your command. She looked out into the void. Let's begin the conversation. Theta 9 was a remote relay station, orbiting a gas giant on the outskirts of the Zeratat system. It was responsible for relaying high-level military communications to the Zari fleet, staffed by 200 officers and protected by a defense ring. It had never faced a threat, not until the sky opened. Without a warning, a ripple of energy tore through space, and the judgment blinked into existence. The Zillary panicked, sirens wailed. Defense systems booted up, fighters scrambled, but none of them reached the human ship. The judgment fired once. No beam, no missile, just a pulse of energy, so dense and fast it folded reality in its path. In under 0.7 seconds, Theta 9 was gone, not destroyed in a traditional sense, just erased. Every signal ceased. Every orbiting satellite vaporized in the Zari capital. The impact was felt instantly. Communication blackouts spread like disease. Command networks collapsed. The illusion of control shattered. It wasn't just the destruction, it was how little effort the humans needed to do it. Supreme Commander Virex stood frozen in the control chamber as his advisors screamed into silent comms. The faces of panicked subcommanders flickered on and off the hollow screens. They're not attacking randomly, one shouted. They're targeting structure, infrastructure, coordination, leadership. They're dismantling the empire piece by piece. Another screen blinked. A grim-faced Zillari officer spoke. Sir, we've intercepted a human transmission sent across 12 systems. Playing it now. The room went silent as the message played. A human voice, female, calm. We are not here to conquer. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to end what you began. This is not revenge. This is balance. Your time is over. Then silence. Virech stared at the screen, his claws tightened. Get me the overseers now. In the deepest parts of the Zeri Empire, the overseers had ruled from the shadows, not military, not political. They were the architects of war, the unseen hand guiding every strategy, every purge. When Virex addressed them, he did so with trembling respect. They've dismantled our outer colonies, erased our command lines. Our fleets are scattering. We need to activate Project Flamefall. The overseers, tall and still, spoke in Perfect synchronization. Flamefall is a last resort. It burns systems to prevent capture entire planets. Commander, I'm aware you'd sacrifice billions if we don't stop them. There will be no empire left. Long pause. Very well, Flamefall is authorized for zones 12 through 19, but understand this: if humanity reaches the core systems, we cannot stop them. Varex nodded once, and then the Overseer said something that chilled him to his bones. Pray they want only balance and not blood. Hours later, in the command room of the Judgment, Evelyn watched the results of Flamefall unfold on her monitors. They were trying to burn their own people. Scorched earth tactics, vaporizing civilian colonies before the humans could reach them. It was desperate, pathetic. She looked over to Kale. Initiate Phase 2. It's time we spoke to their people directly. Yes, Commander. Within moments, thousands of signals launched from the Judgment, bypassing military networks, piggybacking on civilian channels, embedded in entertainment streams and personal messages. Every Zeri citizen saw it, the image of the human battleship, vast and black as death, drifting across a field of stars. And then Evelyn's voice: we are not monsters. We did not start this war, but we will finish it if your leaders will burn you to save themselves. Then they no longer deserve your loyalty. Rise, run, or be consumed by the empire you serve. In homes, in streets, on colony domes, across dozens of planets, the people listened, and for the first time in history, the Zeri citizens began to question, not out of compassion for humans, but out of fear for what their leaders would sacrifice to keep power. Back on Zerit 5, riots began. In military barracks, desertion spiked. Commanders found themselves barricaded by their own people, accused of betraying the Empire's citizens for survival. It was unraveling faster than Virex could hold it together. He stood alone in his quarters, looking out over the once proud capital city. Smoke was rising, explosions lit the horizon. Chaos, and above it all, beyond the thick cloud layer, he could see a speck of black, silent and massive, drifting just beyond the atmosphere. The Judgment had arrived, not with fanfare, not with blaring horns or flashing lights, just drifting, watching, waiting, the way predators do when the prey is too tired to run. Very finally understood what the humans had done. They hadn't attacked the Empire. They had collapsed its foundation, and now, with its heart exposed, the choice was clear: bow or burn. Zerit 5 was choking. From space, the once proud capital of the Zellari Empire resembled wounded animal, scarred, coughing smoke into the upper atmosphere. Its city lights dimming like a body losing blood. Fires raged uncontrolled in the outer district. Food distribution centers were looted by desperate hands. Civil defense drones were no longer defending. They were swatted out of the sky or turned against their operators. Inside the High Citadel, Supreme Commander Varek stood before the Grand Hollow Table, with 1,000 reports scrolling past his eyes, each one more dire than the last. 3 more colonies had rebelled. 1 planetary governor had been lynched by his own people. Entire divisions of the military had gone dark, no longer reporting, either defected or simply gone. His claws tapped against the console as he scanned for any flicker of stability, any sign that the Empire could still be held together. There was none. A nearby Officer, drenched in nervous sweat, cleared his throat. Commander, the humans are requesting a meeting. Varex's head turned slowly. What a meeting, not a surrender, not an ultimatum, a direct meeting. They've transmitted coordinates and security protocols. The transmission came with a timestamp. There's only 1 hour left before the window closes. Varex narrowed his eyes. They want to talk now after all this. The officer nodded. I want every surveillance drone we have deployed in orbit. We'll track every centimeter of that meeting. I want snipers in place, scanners in the walls, and full atmospheric filtration in case they release any biochemical agent. The officer hesitated. Sir, the request was for you alone. No entourage, no surveillance. Just you and their representative. They said any deviation will be taken as a refusal. Varex paused. Then he laughed, a dry, low, hopeless sound. They've already won. Now they're just giving me the dignity of saying it to my face. The designated meeting point was strange, deliberately symbolic. A desolate field outside the ruins of a Zeri Youth Academy that had been leveled. During the riots, the building still smoked and the scent of scorched concrete lingered in the air. A circular landing pad had been carved into the earth, freshly laid with dark steel. Varex arrived in a solitary transport vessel, unarmed, his long imperial cloak dragging in the ash-stained dirt. The S-Judgment hovered silently above in low orbit, too close for comfort yet completely still. Its sheer presence pressed down on the atmosphere like a weight on the chest. Waiting on the pad stood a single figure, human, female, unarmed. Commander Evelyn Ross looked utterly calm, dressed in a muted dark uniform with no medals, no flashy insignia. Her expression held no rage, no malice, just quiet certainty. Varex stepped onto the pad, maintaining eye contact. His military posture was perfect even now. Spine straight, chin high. Human, he said, voice rumbling. You've made quite a spectacle. Evelyn inclined her head. We prefer to let our work speak. You destroyed our systems, crushed our fleets, turned our people against us. She raised an eyebrow. You destroyed our colonies, massacred our civilians. You thought we were too small to matter. And now, Varex said, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing. Is this mercy? Evelyn didn't blink. No, this is restraint. He stared at her, trying to find some trace of fear or arrogance. There was none, just a calm conviction, like someone carrying out a responsibility they never wanted but could no longer avoid. You could finish us, he admitted, his voice lower. You know that. She nodded. We already have. Varex's jaw clenched. We dismantled your communications, collapsed your political structure, disrupted your resource chain. Your fleets have no coordination. Your governors no longer take orders. People no longer believe in your power. This is not a war anymore, Supreme Commander, it's a reckoning. He felt it in her words. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't about pride or conquest. This was balance. They were settling the scale. You expect surrender, he asked. No, she said. I expect realization. He frowned. Of what? That you never had the right to decide who mattered. Back on the S-Judgment, the bridge was tense but steady. Lieutenant Kale monitored orbital scans with precision, keeping an eye on any movement from Zeret 5. Multiple strike teams were on standby, but none were needed. Not yet. The crew watched the live drone feed from the meeting site in silence. One officer whispered, "Think he'll agree to terms?" Kyle didn't respond. Instead, he stared at Evelyn's figure, small but solid in the display. The way she stood, not just as a commander, but as a representative of a species that had endured the worst of what the galaxy had to offer and refused to die quietly. He leaned forward. "She's not here for an agreement." Another officer glanced at him. "Then why?" Kyle said quietly. "To give them a chance to bury themselves with a little dignity." Back on the surface, Evelyn held out a small metallic device, a data core. "This," she said, "contains detailed files, evidence of every war crime committed by the Zari Empire, names, locations, recorded footage, survivors' testimonies. Some of it was buried deep. We found it anyway." Verex didn't reach for the core. She continued, "In 5 hours, this will be transmitted across every known broadcast stream. Civilian and military, your empire will not fall with screams, it will fall with truth. Your people will finally know what they were part of and what they were made to believe was glorious." Verex clenched his fists. "That's not a transmission, that's an execution." Evelyn stepped closer, now barely a meter from him. "No, the execution happened years ago on Earth, on Orion 3. On Vega Station. You just didn't hear the screams because you refused to listen." The silence hung between them. "You've already lost," she said quietly. "Now you choose whether your people understand why or if they just fade, angry and confused. And what happens to me, that depends on what? Whether you're still the monster they followed or finally something more." Verex returned to the high citadel. An hour later, he was different, not broken, not defeated, but changed. He walked into the war chamber, silencing every officer with a single raised hand. "No more war," he said. "No more lies." He placed the data core on the central console. "We will broadcast this ourselves." The room erupted in chaos. "Commander, that's treason. They'll slaughter us. We must hold the line." But he didn't shout. He didn't argue. He only said this: "We had the line and we used it to crush the innocent." That silenced the room, and in the quiet the message played. For hours the people of the Empire watched footage of screaming civilians, children buried in rubble, camps hidden from galactic oversight, the faces of those who gave the orders, the soldiers who carried them out, not just humans, but dozens of species across 100 years. The truth bled across every screen, every channel, every wall. By the end, the Zari didn't weep. They stared as if seeing their reflection for the first time and not liking what stared back. In orbit, Evelyn sat alone in her quarters, eyes closed, listening to the steady hum of the judgment systems. Kyle entered quietly. The broadcast went live, no resistance. They played it across all networks. She opened her eyes slowly. And the public reaction. Kyle hesitated, shocked, silent. Some are angry, a few are beginning to protest, but not against us, against their own command. Even soldiers are laying down arms. Evelyn nodded. Then it begins. Kyle frowned. What does the rebuilding? You really think they'll change? Evelyn leaned back, the weight of 100 sleepless nights settling on her spine. No, not all of them. Maybe not most of them. Then why spare them? She looked at him. Because extinction isn't justice. It's silence, and silence teaches nothing. Kale said nothing more. The human warship drifted quietly above. A world once filled with arrogance and power now forced to look inward. There would still be battles ahead of minds of truths of rebuilding from the ruins. But for now, the war was over, not with an explosion, but with a whisper. Acknowledged. The rain fell hard over Zereth 5, washing ash from the air and blood from the streets. It was the first storm in weeks, and it felt like the planet itself was trying to cleanse what had become of its capital. Beneath the clouds, the once proud banners of the Zelari Empire lay tattered across broken monuments, snapped spires, and shattered walls. No one flew them anymore. A quiet rebellion had taken root, and it hadn't come with gunfire or tanks. It came in the form of truth, the truth that their empire, their pride, their so-called legacy had been built on the bones of the voiceless. For days now, civilians gathered in open squares once reserved for military parades to watch the looped footage of Earth's colonies burning. They sat in silence. No protests, no speeches, just stunned eyes and trembling hands. Parents pulled their children close. Soldiers took off their helmets and laid them at their feet. It wasn't surrender, it wasn't defiance, it was grief. Inside the high citadel, the power structure had collapsed. The overseers had vanished, fled, executed themselves in disgrace, or perhaps gone underground. No one knew. Varix had disbanded the war council. He no longer barked orders or paced with righteous fury. He simply sat in the command chamber, watching as the data streams came in from across the empire. System by system, governors were stepping down. Fleets were docking permanently. Entire battalions had dissolved without a shot fired, and still the S judgment lingered in low orbit. Its presence was a reminder, not of domination, but of accountability. It didn't attack, it didn't threaten, it didn't need to. The humans had said all they needed to. They were watching. Commander Evelyn Ross stood alone in the judgment's observation chamber, her arms crossed, her reflection mirrored in the curved glass that looked down over Zereth 5. The planet's surface flickered with power outages and scattered fires, but most of the fighting had stopped. The silence was unnerving. Kyle entered quietly, holding a date slate. Colonial feed reports are steady. 4 more Zelari systems broadcast the files voluntarily. That makes 36 in total. Evelyn nodded, her eyes fixed on the planet below. And the civilian response? Mixed. Some want trials, some want revenge, some just want to pretend none of it happened, but a surprising number. He hesitated. Speak, she said softly. A surprising number are asking for dialogue, not with us among themselves. They want to understand what they were part of. Some are even organizing memorials for our dead. They're using names of the colonies. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. Long breath. Pain shared as a heavy thing. Kyle looked at her. So what now, Commander? We stay here forever. She finally turned to face him. No, we didn't come here to occupy. We came here to wake them up, and now they're awake, some of them at least. Kyle lowered his voice. You don't believe they'll all learn, do you? Know, but some will, and if some do, they'll teach the rest. And the others. Her voice was quiet but steady. They'll be dealt with in time, but not by us. Meanwhile, in the lower sectors of Zereth 5, a movement had begun. It wasn't organized. It didn't have a name, but it was growing. Former soldiers, ashamed of the uniforms they wore, began dismantling recruitment centers and replacing them with food, shelter. Scientists and engineers, once tasked with building weapons, began repurposing old tech to rebuild infrastructure destroyed by their own fleets. Priests and philosophers emerged from exile, holding public forums under broken domes to speak of morality, of guilt, of change. One of the first official acts of this unspoken movement was to build a monument in the center of what used to be the Grand Parade Square, a simple statue modeled after a human woman. Her hand outstretched, her face not angry, but sorrowful, beneath it a single inscription: to the ones who were silenced, we hear you now. No one officially claimed responsibility for the statue, but no one touched it either, even the few remaining loyalists who still muttered about glory and vengeance. None dared to face it. Something about her face made them stop. Back aboard the Judgment, a transmission request arrived, encrypted from Vyrix himself. Evelyn hesitated before opening it, then finally she accepted. His face appeared tired, older than before. Heavy robes of Supreme Commander were gone. He wore plain armor now, marked only by dirt and ash. I'm not here to negotiate, he said immediately. I know those days are over. She nodded slowly. Then why reach out? He looked down. When he raised his eyes again, they were not defiant, just tired. To ask a question when you don't owe me an answer for. Evelyn waited. He leaned forward slightly. Why didn't you finish? Us. Silence lingered. Finally, Evelyn spoke. Because we didn't come for victory, we came for meaning. We came because someone had to tell you the truth and survive long enough for you to hear it. Varix's gaze dropped again. And now, we leave. His head shot up. Lee. She nodded. Our mission wasn't to police your systems, it was to show you what you became. If you want to change, you will. If not, the galaxy will see it clearly now. Very swallowed. And if we become a threat again, the next time there won't be a meeting. The departure of the Judgment was unlike any event in Zelari history. Thousands of citizens gathered in the city squares, watching the ship rise through the atmosphere, silent, enormous and unchallenged. No one cheered, no one jeered. They simply watched. Children pointed. Parents held them tight. Old soldiers wept silently, not because the humans had left, but because somehow they hadn't stayed. They'd expected a conqueror. What they got was a mirror, and now they had to live with what they saw. Back aboard the Judgment, Evelyn walked through the crew quarters as they prepared for jump. Kale met her by the helm. All systems are green. Set course for Earth. She hesitated. No, not yet. He blinked. A new mission. She nodded slowly. There's another system on the outskirts of Old Zelari territory, the Darwin outposts. They were among the first to resist and among the first to fall. Kyle raised an eyebrow. We're rescuing ghosts now. No, she said. We're finding survivors and reminding them they're not alone. He gave a slight smile. Spoken like a soldier who's tired of war. She looked out at the stars. No, spoken like someone who's seen what war really costs and wants to buy something better. The ship hummed, the stars twisted, the Judgment disappeared, and with it the beginning of something new. Not peace, not yet, but the chance for it. The Judgment cut through hyperspace like a ghost through mist, silent, massive, and purposeful. The stars stretched into long ribbons around the ship as it moved toward a new destination. The Darwin outposts. Commander Evelyn Ross stood in the war room not because they were preparing for battle, but because this room had become her place of reflection. Here, strategies had once been drawn to dismantle an empire. Here, her voice had ordered strikes that crippled fleets, shattered defenses, and brought down centuries of tyranny. Now she stood here wondering what came after victory, when it didn't feel like victory at all. Lieutenant Kyle entered without knocking. He knew better by now. "We're 5 hours out," he reported. "No known auxiliary patrols in the region. Long range scans show possible settlements. No confirmed activity. Possible survivors?" Evelyn asked. "Possibly. We've picked up weak energy signatures. No transmissions. Could be decoys, could be ghosts." She turned toward him, arms crossed. "And you still don't think this is a waste of time?" Kyle exhaled, choosing his words carefully. "Not a waste, Commander. Just a different war. A war without clear enemies," she said flatly. Kyle hesitated. "A war against silence." That made her smile, just a little. Silence is harder to kill than any fleet. The Darwin outposts were a graveyard stretching across the dusty moons of a dying gas giant. The outposts had once been home to over 200,000 people. Most were miners, engineers, and scientists, humans who had dared to expand outward, to build in the dark. Until the Zelari came, the assault had been swift, punishing, and thorough. The outposts were deemed illegal expansions under Zelari imposed territorial codes. The punishment was not fines or warnings, it was annihilation. The humans never had a chance to resist. They weren't soldiers, they were builders, and they were slaughtered for their ambition. When the judgment emerged from hyperspace above Darwin 4, the crew looked out in silence. The planet's moon still bore the black scorch marks of orbital bombardments. Twisted metal hung in low orbit. Fragments of once functional satellites. Debris from civilian crafts and station. Wreckage caught in a slow, endless dance. No signs of life, but Evelyn wasn't convinced. "Launch recon drones," she ordered. "Deploy a ground team to the last known mining sector on Darwin 4. We search everything." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Personally?" She gave him a look. He sighed. "Of course, personally." The shuttle landed on Darwin 4's surface with a quiet hiss, stirring the gray dust that coated everything like ash. The sky was dull orange, the sun obscured by chemical clouds. Cracked skeletal structures littered the landscape, watchtowers, broken rail systems, domes collapsed inwards. Evelyn moved slowly through the ruins with Kyle and 2 Marine escorts. Each footstep echoed in a place that hadn't heard human sound in years. They passed a children's park, a rusted swing swaying gently in the wind. Beyond it, a makeshift wall of memorials, scratched names on metal panels, old photos and shattered frames, toys left untouched. The dust. Kyle stared at the wall, then looked away. "Too many," he whispered. "They wanted to live," Evelyn said quietly. "That was their only crime." As they approached the central dome, Coyle's wrist scanner lit up. "Commander, heat signature weak, buried underground, roughly 20 m." Evelyn snapped her fingers. "Marines start excavation now." They moved quickly, shoveling away debris and twisted metal. 10 minutes later, a sealed hatch was exposed. Battered but intact, one Marine pride It opened, a hiss of stale air escaped. And then movement, a hand small, frail. Human, then a face appeared, dirty. Witty, trembling, a girl maybe 12 years old. She stared up at the soldiers and flinched as they reached out. Evelyn stepped forward slowly, removing her helmet. "It's okay," she said gently. "You're safe now." The girl didn't speak, she just stared, lips trembling. Then from below, more voices echoed up. Weak, hoarse, but alive. They found 37 survivors, children, elders, and adults. All had been living underground for years in a patched-together life. Support bunker beneath the ruins of the primary mining facility. It had been built in desperation during the initial attack. Somehow, miraculously, it held. Inside, the air was stale but breathable. The survivors were malnourished, some sick, some blinded from years without proper light, and yet they had survived. They hadn't sent signals because they were afraid. The Zari were still listening. When they were finally aboard the Judgment, the medbay overflowed with quiet tears and whispered thanks. Evelyn sat with the girl. Her name was LRA, as doctors ran scans and treated her bruises. "Are there more?" LRA asked. "More survivors?" Evelyn asked gently. "No more humans out there?" Evelyn nodded. "Yes. Billions were still here." LRA's eyes welled up. "They told us we were all that was left." "Who told you that?" Before the station went silent, the auxiliary transmission, they said Earth had been destroyed, that there was no one left, that they were the last. Evelyn's fists clenched, but her voice remained soft. "They lied." LRA stared at her for a long time. Then she asked, "Are we going to fight them now?" Evelyn paused, and for the first time, she wasn't sure of the answer. Later in the war room, Kale pulled up a new set of data points. "We've identified 17 other abandoned colonies marked as destroyed by Zilari Command. Now we know that may not be accurate." Evelyn nodded. "And the Zari, any reaction to our arrival here?" Kyle grinned bitterly. "Oh, they noticed. 3 smaller cruisers entered the system 5 minutes ago, holding position just outside weapons range, watching us, scared, curious." "Good," she paced. "If they want to watch, let them watch. Let them see what survival looks like. Not conquest, not war, just defiance." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "And if they open fire?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Then we erase them." Down in the ship's refugee quarters, LRA wandered the halls. Everything was too clean, too bright, too alive. It made her nervous, but it also made her hope. She found herself in front of a viewing window, staring at the stars and beyond them at the broken moon of Darwin 4. Soldier passed by and paused. "You okay, kid?" She looked up at him. "Why did they hate us?" He didn't know how to answer, so she did it for him. "Because we didn't die when they told us to." He nodded slowly. "That's exactly why." As the Judgment prepared to jump again, this time toward another abandoned outpost, the Zilari cruisers remained distant. They didn't fire. They didn't run. They just watched as the ship vanished into the dark, heading to rescue the next forgotten corner of human tragedy. A silent message was left behind on an open channel. Not a threat, not a boast, just a sentence. "We're still here." And far away, in the broken heart of a fallen empire, the message played on every screen, every device, every channel. The ghosts were coming home. And this time they were not alone. The Judgment emerged from hyperspace, with the quiet grace of a predator used to hunting in silence. In its wake, the folds of reality stitched themselves back together, and the stars returned to their normal state, still cold and distant, but something was different. This time, they weren't arriving at another battlefield. They were arriving at a rumor the alien belt had once been home to a thriving ring of human research stations nestled in the gravitational balance between three dwarf planets. It was known for its technological innovation, energy development, and interspecies cooperation until the Zeri labeled it a security threat. What followed was a total blackout. No communications, no distress signals. Just another entry in the Zellari archive. Under neutralized. But weeks ago, a garbled transmission had reached a human listening post on the edge of Andar space, faint, scattered, almost unintelligible. A single phrase repeated in Old Terran code: "This is Alien 6. We are not dead." No coordinates, no detail, just desperate whisper from what was supposed to be a graveyard. That whisper had brought the judgment. Kyle leaned over his terminal as streams of data poured in from scanning probes. Evelyn stood behind him, arms folded, watching as the ship's AI cross-referenced power signatures, radiation levels, and gravitic anomalies. Nothing from Alien 1 through 5. K. muttered, no residual heat, no power. Just dust and wreckage. What about 6? Evelyn asked. He zoomed in. There it was, a single energy reading, pulsing faintly beneath the surface of a broken asteroid. Alien 6 had been buried intentionally. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Hide and survive. It's becoming a human tradition. Kyle smiled grimly. Hard to kill people who won't die. She nodded. Prep the landing team and tell the medbay to expect the unexpected. The shuttle descended slowly into the asteroid's debris field. Chunks of metal drifted lazily in the vacuum, some still bearing the scorched emblem of the alien initiative. Evelyn stood in the cockpit, staring out through the viewport as the asteroid's jagged surface came into view. Kyle adjusted the sensor array. I've got it, a sealed bunker, power levels low but stable. There's life down there, faint but real. Any defenses? None. If they're still alive, they've got nothing left. The shuttle landed on the narrow docking platform, jutting out of the rock like a broken tooth. Sealed hatch blinked faintly in the dark. One last cry of survival. Evelyn led the team out, mag boots clamping. With each step on the ancient hull, the silence was overwhelming, broken only by the static hum of failing systems. She pressed her hand to the access panel. It scanned her palm, then astonishingly, the hatch hissed open. Inside was darkness and then light flickering. Weak but enough to reveal a corridor lined with dust and hope. They stepped in. The survivors of Alien 6 weren't what anyone expected. They weren't starving in corners or lying weakly on floors. They were working. The first thing Evelyn saw was a group of gaunt engineers still hunched over consoles, data pads in their trembling hands. The air was thin, recycled one too many times. The lights flickered and the floors groaned, but there was order, purpose. A tall woman, maybe in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and soot on her face, turned slowly at the sound of footsteps. Her eyes locked with Evelyn's. Then she smiled. "You're real," she whispered. Evelyn stepped forward. "So are you." The woman exhaled, then collapsed into Her arms, they found 143 survivors, most had taken refuge in the core of the station when the attack began. They sealed the lower sectors, rude power, and built a closed-loop ecosystem with the help of an old terraforming AI. They'd modified for survival instead of expansion. It wasn't enough for everyone. Thousands had died in the first month, but the ones who remained adapted. Evelyn sat with the station's leader, Dr. L.R.A. Hannett, a physicist turned commander by necessity in the station's central chamber, once a power relay hub. "You were buried," Evelyn said quietly. Dr. Hannett nodded. "We buried ourselves. We thought we'd be safer under the rock. And we were. The Zillary thought they destroyed us. They didn't check for life signs beneath the crust." Evelyn shook her head. "They always underestimate what's underneath." Dr. Hannett's eyes turned sharp. "We've been listening, Commander. We heard the message, the broadcasts. We know what you did to the Zillary command structure." She leaned forward, voice lowering. "Did you come to finish what they started?" Evelyn's face didn't flinch. "No, I came to tell you the galaxy still has room for you, and that you were never forgotten." Dr. Hannett's eyes glistened. "We thought we were the last. You're not." Silence settled between them. Comfortable finally. Then Evelyn added, "We're bringing others back from Darwin. From outposts long thought dead. We're rebuilding." The judgment wasn't just a weapon, it was a signal. Dr. Hannett chuckled. "So you're still fighting?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Always." Back on the judgment, Coyle watched as alien survivors were escorted onto the ship. They walked slowly, blinking against the bright lights and fresh air. Some wept, others simply stared in disbelief. A boy, maybe 15, looked up at the massive steel hull of the ship and whispered, "Is this Earth's?" Kyle nodded. "It is," the boy smiled. "I didn't think Earth had anything left." Kale crouched beside him. "That's the funny thing about humans, you don't have to see us to know we're still out there." The boy nodded, then asked, "Do we get to go home?" Kyle looked toward Evelyn across the deck. "Yeah, kid, that's the whole point." Word spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Alien was alive, not just alive. Rescued. Broadcasts from the judgment circulated through civilian channels, black market frequencies, and abandoned satellite arrays still clinging to old protocols. And across former Zillary-controlled space, old human outposts began lighting up one by one. Some sent messages, some simply activated ancient beacons, letting Earth know they were still there. A chain reaction had begun. And the judgment wasn't the only ship responding anymore. Smaller vessels, repaired freighters, hidden cruisers, salvaged dreadnoughts began appearing across fringe sectors. Earth's reach, once strangled, was now stretching back out like a tree, regrowing through ash. The war was over, but the revival had just begun. Back on Zaret 5, things were changing too, with the fall of the Empire's chain of command and the viral truth of its crimes. A transitional council had formed, unelected, disorganized, but sincere, made up of former soldiers, defected politicians, even civilians who had never held power but now held purpose. The monument to the fallen still stood, but now it was surrounded by candles, artwork, and handwritten messages, not of apology but of understanding. They weren't trying to erase the past. They were learning from it, and far above the planet, orbiting quietly and unseen, new kind of ship waited, not human, not Auxiliary, but something different. Painted in the colors of both, a joint. Construction effort. A start. Evelyn stood once more in the judgments. Observation deck, watching aliens shrink. Behind them as the ship made its next jump, Kyle approached, a data pad. Hand, new transmissions coming in from Orion Drift, survivors found on a derelict mining station, 5 adults. 2 children, malnourished but alive. Evelyn didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. They survived, she said quietly. Kale nodded. That's becoming a theme. She turned to him. You think the Zilari ever thought it would end like this? Kyle shrugged. They thought they'd silence us, but every scream, every cry, every whisper, it echoed. She looked back at the stars. And now we answer. In the void between stars, where even light hesitated, the judgment glided. Like a shadow with purpose, but this time it wasn't heading toward rumors or distress signals. This time it was going straight into the lion's den. Evelyn stood on the bridge, arms behind her back, eyes locked on the central display as a massive object slowly came into view, an orbital ring structure so vast it seemed to coil around the planet like a serpent. Zeri Corworld Varnek Prime, the heart of what remained of the Empire. Once it had been considered unreachable, guarded by hundreds of defense satellites, cloaked battle platforms, and an automated fleet of AI-controlled warships. It had been the place where all decisions flowed outward, where the Empire's leaders had lived like gods, untouched by the blood they spilled. But now, most of those defenses were cold. Others had turned inward, aimed not at outsiders but at their own fleeing command ships. The judgment had not come for war, it had come for reckoning. Status, Evelyn said calmly. Kyle stood nearby, checking data. Streams, we're broadcasting on all known Zilari frequencies, open channels only. Full transparency. Response. 23 satellites attempted to lock weapons, then shut down. Auto-defensive AI appears to have been disabled internally. She gave a tight nod. Good, they know we're not bluffing. No return message yet. They're waiting to see what we'll do. Kyle turned to her, lowering his voice. And what will we do, Commander? She took a breath. Give them a choice. Below on the planet's surface, the Transitional Council had grown into something more, an uneasy coalition of former Zilari military figures, civil leaders, and grassroots representatives, many of whom had never dreamed of holding power. Now they were its last line of defense, or maybe its first line of hope. Counselor Varneth paced before the war table in the Unity Hall, a grand structure once used for military planning, now filled with scared civilians trying to build a future from bones. She's here, he muttered. The judgment is above our heads. Do you understand what that means? One command from her and we're vapor. Another counselor, Javine, spoke up calmly. She hasn't fired, she hasn't threatened, she wants a meeting. You think this is diplomacy? Varnath hissed. This is a test. She wants to see if we'll gravel. Then maybe we should, Javine replied coldly. Maybe we owe it to every life we failed to protect. The room fell silent. It wasn't about surrender anymore. It was about accountability, about whether they could look this human commander in the eye and tell her they understood, truly understood, the horror their empire had created, and whether they were ready to stop hiding behind the ruins of their pride An hour later, in the heart of the orbital structure, above Varnek Prime, Evelyn stepped off a transport shuttle and into the old hall of Dominion. She wore no armor, no weapons, just her dark command uniform, and the weight of billions of silent dead walking behind her. The council members were already waiting. Some stood tall, others stared at the floor. None spoke. Evelyn moved to the center of the room. The echo of her footsteps was deafening. "Thank you," she said. The room blinked. In confusion, she looked around. "Thank you for showing up, for standing here unarmed, unsure but present. That means more than you know." Varneth's jaw tightened. "Are we to beg for mercy?" Evelyn looked at him. "No, you already received it." The silence tightened. "We came with a ship capable of turning this planet to ash. We didn't. We came with footage of your crimes, your massacres, your prisons. We released it to your own people, not your enemies. We didn't demand reparations or territory or surrender. We gave you the one thing no empire ever gave us." She stepped closer. "A chance to choose what happens next." Javin leaned forward. "And if we choose wrong?" Evelyn's face didn't change. "You won't get to choose again." Back aboard the Judgment, Kyle monitored the diplomatic uplinks as a team of analysts translated the council's private deliberations. None of it was secret. Transparency had been a condition of Evelyn's presence. He leaned back in his chair, letting the voices drift in his ears, some fearful, others defiant, many uncertain. Then came a whisper from the intelligence officer beside him. "Sir, we're picking up movement, long range scan, deep space, multiple signatures. Human in origin." Kyle blinked. "Human from where?" "No registry, no IFFF tags, civilian ships. Maybe old tech, scattered formation. Are they armed? Minimal, some light defense systems. They're not here for a fight." Kyle leaned in as the officer adjusted the sensor focus. One by one the ships came into view. Freighters, mining vessels, converted liners, scrap-patched cruisers, a fleet of survivors, humans who had once fled the Zillary purge, who had vanished into the dark, waiting for a time to return. That time had come. The message from the lead vessel came directly to the Judgment's bridge. It was short. "We heard Earth rose again. We want to help build what comes next." Kyle turned, stunned, and relayed the transmission to Evelyn. She read it once, then closed her eyes. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she allowed herself to feel it. This wasn't the end of a war. It was the beginning of something else. Down in the Hall of Dominion, Evelyn stood before the council once more. "The choice is yours," she said. "Keep hiding behind dead authority, or help forge something new. The survivors are returning from across the stars, from places you tried to erase. They don't want to rule you. They want to rebuild with you." Javin looked around at his peers, then said, "And who leads it?" Evelyn's answer was quiet but absolute. "No one. And everyone." She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing." They looked up. "You don't need to prove anything to us. You need to prove it to yourselves." And then she was gone. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy shifted again. Judgment remained in orbit for a short while longer, not as a threat but as a symbol. Relief ships began arriving, carrying food, medicine, rebuilding materials. Survivors were reunited. Entire systems, once declared cleansed, were discovered to have held on in silence, waiting for Rescue, the Zeri Council once fractured by guilt and pride, began to open. Forums, trials were held not for show, but for truth. War criminals were named. Apologies were spoken, not just by those who committed the atrocities, but by those who looked away. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and above it all, the human fleet grew, not in numbers, in purpose. The judgment was no longer alone. New ships joined it, not built for war but for restoration. They carried teachers, healers, engineers, historians, artists, people who had seen the abyss and chose to build bridges over it instead of digging deeper. Evelyn stood once more on the observation deck, now lined with portraits, paintings, sketches, holograms of the dead, colonists from Darwin, children from alien families from Vega, scientists from Orion, and now added to the wall the faces of Zelari, children, victims of their own regime. Kyle entered behind her. The new coalition fleet is requesting your presence at the dedication ceremony. She didn't move. Kyle smiled softly. You're allowed to feel proud, you know. I don't, she said. He stepped beside her. But I am. Evelyn finally turned to him. Do you think this will last? Kyle looked out at the stars. I think we bought time, not peace, not forgiveness. Just time, and it's up to us not to waste it. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then let's make it count. And with that, they turned toward the stars, not as conquerors, not as victims, but as something the galaxy had almost forgotten existed. Builders, a new sun rose over Varnic Prime, but for once it wasn't witnessed from the scorched balconies of power or the shielded towers of Imperial command. It rose above open fields where tents had replaced palaces, where humans and Zeri worked side by side to plant something as fragile and stubborn as hope in what used to be the Plaza of Ascendancy, a place where statues of conquest once stood tall, now stood a tree, just a tree. Nothing genetically enhanced, nothing radiant or artificial, just a native Varnic tree dug from old soil, replanted by a human child and a Zelari. One, beneath it sat a plaque, not of gold, not of crystal, just steel. The past did not bury us, it fed us. Now we grow. That was the new spirit of the coalition, not a government, not an empire, a promise. And the judgment was no longer a symbol of fear above them. It had become a legend. Evelyn stood at the main terminal of the Judgment's bridge, staring at the latest communicates, peace treaties, cultural exchanges, plans for interspecies schools, reconstructed colonies, and technology cooperatives. But she knew what they all really were. First steps, nothing more. But that was enough. Kyle approached from the side, holding a slim silver case. Got something for you. She raised a brow. Is it alcohol? Please let it be alcohol, he smirked. Better it's closure. She opened the case slowly. Inside sat a metal plane, no ornate crest, no military insignia, just the symbol of Earth, half lit, half shadowed. Beneath it, a line engraved. She didn't burn the world, she taught it to see. Evelyn said nothing. Kyle nodded a little more serious. The coalition wants to name a station after you. No, he blinked. No, no monuments, no statues, no history books written in blood. We already made that mistake once. Then, what do you want? She stared out at the stars. I want them to remember themselves, not me. Kyle chuckled. You never stop, do you? No, because the moment we stop pushing, the rot comes back. He placed the case down and leaned Beside her, I got a message today from LRA, the girl from Darwin. He nodded. She's going to join the first Interessi's Academy on the rebuilt Orion station. Says she wants to be a historian. Says, quote, we should learn from every scar, not cover them. Evelyn smiled softly. Smart kid, she's one of many thousands now, kids who never saw the Empire's glory, only its ashes, and they don't want to rebuild what came before. They want something else. They want something human, Evelyn said. Kyle raised a brow. Even the Zilari. Evelyn turned to him. Especially the Zilari. You don't come back from genocide by pretending it didn't happen. You come back by learning how to mourn what you were and choose what you'll be. Kyle looked away, a little quiet. It's going to take generations. She nodded. Then we better get started. Across the galaxy, the Echo Fleet was born, not as a military arm, but as a memory, ships repurposed not for domination but restoration. Every ship bore the name of a lost colony. Every hull was marked not with victories but with witnessed tragedies. One ship bore the name Torvan, the first Zillary vessel destroyed by the Judgment. It was rebuilt by both human and Zeri engineers and staffed with officers from both species. Its mission, humanitarian aid. When asked why they named it after a fallen enemy, Evelyn answered simply, because it's where we started learning how to end the cycle. On Earth, people cheered the return of their lost ships, returned full of survivors once thought vaporized. Darwin engineers, alien scientists, Orion miners, Vega refugees. Not all made it, but enough returned to rewrite what extinction meant. No longer a full stop, but a comma, a pause before a new sentence. Evelyn stepped foot on Earth for the first time in years. To no parade, no ceremony, just a silent line of civilians holding candles, photos, names, and when she passed they didn't salute. They bowed their heads, not in reverence, in shared grief and shared gratitude. In the far edges of what used to be the Empire, a rebel cell still believed that humans had tricked their people. They called themselves the Purity Flame. Leftover ember of arrogance. They sent a single broadcast: we will rise again. The Judgment, now stationed far away from command, responded with just two words: try us. They didn't broadcast again. Evelyn eventually stepped down from active command, not because she was tired, though she was, not because she was finished, she knew better, but because the Judgment wasn't her anymore. It belonged to the galaxy, to the survivors, to the new generation who needed a symbol that wasn't built on war but the end of it. She left command in Kale's hands. He was reluctant but capable. As he stood on the bridge for the first time as commander, she passed him the same words she once spoke to herself. This ship doesn't fire first, it listens first. Kyle smiled, and when it has to fire, she looked him dead in the eyes. Then let it speak clearly. Years passed. The coalition expanded, not as a superpower but a network, fragile, fluid, imperfect, but real. Zilari youth no longer pledged themselves to empires, but to projects: restoration, exploration, education. The galaxy didn't forget the Judgment's shadow, but over time it remembered its light more. What had begun as a symbol of terror became one of balance, one of resilience, one of justice. On the 10th anniversary of the first human retaliation, the galaxy observed Remembrance Day, not a day of celebration, a day of reflection. Across Hundreds of worlds, people gathered to read the names of the dead. Zari read. Human names. Humans read Zelari names. And in doing so, they reclaimed their own. No side one, only the truth did on. A quiet farm nestled in the rolling hills of post-war Earth, Evelyn Ross lived without uniform or rank, just as Evelyn, she grew her own food, taught children in the local village, watched the stars at night. One day a girl knocked on her door. She was about 18. Bright eyes, thin but healthy, she carried a data tablet filled with interviews. "You're Evelyn Ross," the girl said. "Yes, I'm writing about the reckoning. About how it started, how it ended. I want to understand it." Evelyn sipped her tea. "It hasn't ended." The girl blinked. "But the war's over." Evelyn sat down her cup. "That was never the real war." The girl looked confused. "Then what was?" Evelyn leaned forward, believing we were different, that only humans suffered, that only the enemy caused pain, that vengeance was strength, that silence was safety. She touched the girl's tablet gently. "Write this down. War doesn't start with weapons, it starts with forgetting." The girl paused, then nodded. She stayed for hours, asking more questions, recording Evelyn's words, listening not to a hero but to a witness. And when she left, she turned at the gate and asked, "Do you miss it? Command the stars." Evelyn smiled. "I never left them, I just stopped trying to own them." The girl left. The wind picked up. Sunset, and in the sky above, the Judgment passed in low orbit, its lights soft, its hull aged, its core steady. Still watching, still listening, still remembering. Because that was humanity's greatest power after all, not their ships, not their weapons, but their refusal to forget who they were and who they could